And we are live from, well, at least I'm here in the city of Boston at near City Hall, the State House, and MIT, where we have been in policy jams, basically, working with our regulators and folks in cities across the land with Code for America in the aftermath of this apathon with the ABA, and thinking about data and basically its role in life. So to help demystify some of this and understand, I hope a little bit better, bigger picture from a policy perspective, and especially that very difficult one in the intelligence community and related to more hardcore law enforcement and intelligence, Thomson Reuters has been very kind to set up another thought leader conversation, this time with Jason Thomas about basically the future. And it might just be your future as we get into an innovative big data age. Innovation is your role, isn't it? Literally, you're chief of innovation
yeah. So I run, like you said, what we ostensibly call innovation, which basically means that at the end of the day, actually, I'll pat myself on the back here. I have the best job in the world. And the reason it's the best job in the world is because I get to go home and think about things, think about content, think about data, think about problems we can solve with that content and data. And then I come back to Thomson Reuters and we build them and we test out those ideas. And we're fully embracing the idea of failing smartly. So we conduct experiments using our content, using our data, using partnerships that we have with other organizations like MIT and others, and attempting to solve problems for not just my limited space, which is the government space, but more global problems like access to justice and hunger and poverty and those types of things. So it's like I said, it's probably one of the better jobs in the world. So
that's the big, really the big umbrella in terms of policy scope and ambit, and it's just so practical when you look at the lines of business and the capabilities of Thomson Reuters. I can see why you say it's the greatest job. I'm not sure if we can do this virtually, but so you don't have to pat yourself on the back. Let me see if I can get behind the screen here.
There you go, exactly.
There you go. All right.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I was alluding to a moment ago is a very different scale, but in some ways perhaps related to your day job, which is one of the ways that we're pursuing our innovation and entrepreneurship agenda at the Media Lab, in particular in Sandy Pentland's group, the big data group, Human Dynamics, has been by engaging civilian governments, including at the city level, and with civil society, really volunteer hackers like Code for America and legal hackers, and just getting our hands on some projects and doing what you used to call rapid prototyping, or maybe it's a type of agile sprint or scrum. I'm not sure what it is, but I can tell you it's fun. And sometimes it results in ideas, or at least working prototypes, or maybe like alpha versions of things, which on any number of occasions have been sufficient for folks in government or working with the public sector to take it up and either iterate things in open source in a GitHub repo or several, or forking them, or turning into products and services by private companies. And so in our own somewhat niche way, we've been also beginning to have more of a focused, I'm going to say, push into the innovation economy, in this case through prototypes, and with the public sector. And we're just coming off now of a week, thanks to, I want to just do a quick shout out. Casey, your social media guru at Thomson Reuters, has been just a pleasure to work with, frankly, with your sponsorship of the American Bar Association Tech Show. We at basically the legal part of our big data research goes under the moniker law.MIT.edu. We're doing some academics and some research, and the legal hackathons that we that we do there were used in a team up with MIT and the ABA Tech Show to allow for an online set of projects through a kind of online appathon. So we're just fresh off of, oh God, might be about 20 projects, I think, all told, with people, law students and lawyers and hackers and everything else, working on some access to justice, as you mentioned, some relate to courts, some are entrepreneurs and better forms and startup documents, a wide range. And so I'm very, very interested to, before we get into, I think, the main course and your, the work you do at a higher level with some of the much more difficult problems, complexities of spy versus spy. But down here, just in Main Street and in City Hall, what are you seeing in your work and over the horizon by way of the major strategic either capabilities or tools or technologies or skills that really people ought to be focusing on, the ones that really matter? And of course, if you've seen any apps or services or anything cool that that you'd like to notify people about that maybe has special value or importance, or could you share a little about that?
Sure. Yeah, the interesting thing about this conversation is technology in general is interesting, right? And it's interesting because most times when we think about technology, we think about computers, or we think about mobile devices, or we think about wearable technologies, or whatever the issue is. And a lot of times we forget that technologies can be very simple things, like a hammer is a technology, right? And it can be used for good stuff, which is kind of the stuff that we're talking about here. It can also be used for bad things, right? I can use a hammer to drive a nail in a board, which is a good thing, or I could use a hammer to beat you over the head with, right? And which is a bad thing.
You'd have to be pretty fast, but yeah, I think we just demonstrated if we can pat each other on the back, we can probably damage with a hammer, I suppose. Yeah. So, it's a tool, and humans are tool-using animals, and I see where you're going.
Yeah. So the interesting thing, which has always been the case with humanity in general, culture in general, is that people come together to create new and exciting technologies, new and exciting tools that help them live their lives better, but also in an altruistic way help others. And hackathons, appathons, whatever you want to call it, are always good, and not just those types of projects, but very general open source projects, things that a community of believers come together to create, either for the good of the world, good of their particular group, whatever. They're so exciting because that's where you get your best work, right? You get your best work out of people who are willing and motivated to put in the time, energy, and effort because they believe in whatever the cause is. And we see this a lot. We see it at events like what we're describing here with the hackathon. Right. We see it inside our own organization. So we actually have inside of Thomson Reuters sprinted kinds of hackathon-like events where people just come together and say, "Would this be a good idea? Yeah, that sounds like cool. That sounds like it's cool. Let's code that. Let's build that and see what happens." And I think over the long haul, I think that's how development is going to technology development. I think that's how it's going to progress strategically. I mean, tactically, companies come to create products and services and they make money. But I think strategically, and we've seen this in the past, more and more exciting technologies come out of small groups of people working on a problem they think they can solve, and not in it most times to make a buck. They're in it to solve the problem, whatever it is. And you look at a lot of companies and you realize that's kind of how they got their start. Right. And there's so much green space there, right? There's so much opportunity to come together to do that kind of thing. It's so exciting. Like, it's incredibly exciting. The challenge, though, and this is where my part of the organization comes in to the picture, is what happens when somebody takes that cool and useful tool and beats somebody over the head with it, right? And what do we do? And how can you mitigate the risk of kind of that unintended consequence of the development of a particular technology? So yeah, I'm really excited by kind of the crowdsourced, if you want to use that phrase, development, technological development kind of ethos that we're seeing. But there's always there's a flip side to that typically, and the flip side usually involves, to some degree, risk, and how can we mitigate that risk. So it's definitely exciting.
Got it. Thank you. That was helpful. It's funny in retrospect that I have not defined the word technology in probably, I don't know, 15 years or something, or more maybe. In like it's the T in MIT.
Right.
It's like one of the words in like any number of job titles I've held and stuff I yak about all day.
Yeah.
And what you said is very canny observation. Technology, when you break it right down, isn't what we commonly make it mean now, which is quite narrow, related to computers, basically networks and digital information. It's really about kind of tools and processes, and that is a very timely reminder as we start getting into this Internet of Things and the rest of the they talk about paving or whatever, connecting the last mile. Really increasingly, I think business, legal dimensions, the social dimensions of the integration of these tools and technologies into business models and families and education and healthcare and government, really every part of our life and economy and society. Much of it now, it lives in that, in the rest of the proper definition of what technology is, doesn't it?
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is we typically, to your point, we typically think of tech as these very complex systems or machine-oriented things, when in fact, a lot of technological development of late is actually around things to make our lives easier, right? So if you think about, so I have two mobile phones. I have the Android. I'm pulling them out of my pocket, by the way.
Yeah, let's take a look.
I have, yeah, exactly. I have an Android. I have a Android phone, and I have the iPhone 6. Right.
Okay.
I can do everything I can do with this. Well, let me put it this way. Everything that's in this device, which happens to be my wallet,
yep,
I can do with this device, with the sole exception that
Jay, could you hold them both up for a second?
I'm not going to show this to
you. A little screenshot and
yeah. So everything I can do with this device, I can do with this.
Just 1 second. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Gotcha. Thanks. Oh, so they have what capability equivalents roughly?
So capability equivalents, with the sole exception that our state governments require us to carry a piece of plastic that prove our identity, right? Driver's license.
Yep.
And that driver's license is now, because we have, I'm putting it back in my wallet, is now.
Don't lose it.
Yeah, exactly. But because technology is being developed in such a way to make our lives simpler, certain states inside the United States, Iowa for one, will be putting their driver's license on mobile phones.
Oh.
So you won't have to carry a driver's license, a physical driver's license in your phone or in your wallet. You'll carry it on your phone. Here's the challenge with that. And there's a bunch of other states that are contemplating it. Delaware, Arizona, I think, is contemplating it. Here's the challenge with that. The challenge is, what happens, for example, when the battery dies on the phone and you don't have your driver's license with you? If you get stopped on the side of the road and a law enforcement officer pulls you over for speeding or whatever and asks for your license and you can't produce it because the battery's dead on your phone, I'm going to bet money that you're going to take a trip down to the station. Because if you can't prove your identity because the battery's dead, they're going to have to figure out a way to prove your identity in some other fashion.
Yeah.
And so my point is, technology, we've built these technologies to really help make our lives simpler. But by building these tools, we're actually becoming slave to the tool itself.
Yeah.
Right? Because now, it used to be, for example, by the way, have you ever left your mobile phone at home, like in the morning?
Seldom do I leave it home, but I wish I could say I never leave it anywhere else.
Okay. And what happens when you've left it? You're like, oh my gosh, I got to go find my phone. It's like losing your wallet, right?
Yeah, I'd say it's really even more chilling in certain ways in terms of my felt sensation and like, what's going on with the adrenaline and the urgent sense. And, I go through nightmare scenarios and then emergency protocols of first dialing it and thinking back. And usually I'm basically like not that well composed for a few moments.
Yeah, and that feeling is not unique to folks engaged in tech issues, right? That feeling is ubiquitous across, I would say, most Americans. Because over the last 20 years, we have gone from people having these devices and us looking at those people as being special, right? 20 years ago, if somebody had a mobile phone, we thought those people were, at least most of us thought those people, well, what do they need a phone for? Why do they need a phone to talk to somebody all the time?
Right.
Fast show off, all that.
Possibly like, captain of industry, or maybe they needed to launch nuclear weapons, but it was unusual for sure.
Fast forward 20 years to now, if you are in a crowded room and you ask somebody who here does not have a mobile phone, somebody raises their hand 9 times out of 10, and I've had this happen to me. I'll give talks and I'll ask who here does not have a mobile device. And if one person raises their hand, without a doubt, after my talk, someone will come up to me and go, that's the weird guy. No one talks to him, right?
Wow.
And so you see what's happened is over the past 20 years, this device has become essential to living our lives, and it's influenced the way we live our lives. And it's happened in such a way that we've forgotten what it's done to us. The fact that you go through this psychological feeling of loss when you leave your phone somewhere means that this device is obviously valuable to you. Right? And it's valuable because it connects you to people. It's valuable because it gives you access to information. It's valuable because it can make you feel a part of something larger than yourself, right? And at the end of the day, because we kind of have had that happen to us, we've forgotten what technology means anymore, I think, in a lot of ways. Technology, although I talk about it being like a hammer, right? And we try to use it to simplify our lives, but in a lot of ways, because we're trying to do the simplification and letting technology manage that simplification for us, it's actually making it more complex. It's making it more difficult for us because now we have systems that, I mean, think of it this way. When you lose your phone now, there are systems in place that allow you to remotely wipe your phone, right? Well, what happens if that system gets hacked and somebody can remotely wipe your phone without your permission? And then, so there's these very interconnected platforms that actually make things more complex for us. Think about the celebrity photo thing from not long ago, right? Where the cloud got hacked and all these celebrity nude photos get released. Well, part of that was because celebrities didn't realize that when they push things out, that it goes up to the cloud and it stays there, right? And what got hacked was the account in the cloud.
Right.
Well, that just adds complexity because now I have to know that not only is the photo on my device, but it's also in the cloud somewhere. And if I'm not technically savvy, which I would say a lot of folks aren't, understanding that is a challenge. And that's not slowing down, right? The complexities that are attached to how we use tech are not slowing down. So in an effort to simplify things, in a lot of ways, what we're doing is overcomplicating.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, quite a lot. So this is really not the conversation I thought we'd have, but it's the conversation that we need to be having just now. And it's very timely, not only based on tearing the topics from the headlines, frankly, right, but also literally. I've been working with a team on composing a new kind of curriculum. MIT doesn't have, and I don't believe ever going to have a law school. Right. It's a style violation, but it's very into rules, and it's into rule-based systems, and it's into engineering. It's into a great deal of where some of that solution space can come from to more, I'm going to say, elegantly and efficiently and effectively, even humanely design the types of online environments and systems and services and platforms and basically outcomes that you'd expect. Not maybe so different from many that we get with the physical world, where you know where your rotary phone is and what happens if it doesn't work in the old days, and you know what happens if your plastic license is somewhere, and how to deal with that. And, you know, translating that forward to a digital identity world, and some of the implications of that are not impossible. They are somewhat vexing, I think, when you draw the scenario. I think most people, including me, would say, well, gosh, I don't know what I would say to a state trooper if they pull me over for who knows why. You know, could be a blinker or just anything. And they ask for the license, as they would, and my phone is not working, which it sometimes isn't. Then what does that mean? So the customary rule is you produce the license, and it's a physical artifact. You know, might it mean, so if we could just go with me for a moment, in the world of ideas, and then I'd be happy to credit you if we use it in the curriculum. So identity is a big part of what I'm into, and I think what we'll be looking at in the curriculum. And so if you think about state and local issued identities, and just stick with the driver's license for the moment. It's a nice scenario you painted.
Right.
What would be the appropriate design? What would be the types of use cases and requirements and constraints that would be the right sort for state governments and the vendors that are in that space, with the DMVs and others, and third-party people at bars and many places that have to really integrate. Fleets and taxis and others need to deal with a lot of licenses all the time. The data model and integration points. What would we do? Would it be something more like you don't have to carry a physical token so long as you consent to like a biometric or you say enough information so they can find you in an LDAP call and then inspect the photo and ask you your home address and kind of authenticate you without the need for these primitive tokens?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and believe me, if I had the answer or you had the answer, we wouldn't be doing this Google Hangout. We would be sitting on a beach somewhere enjoying a pina colada, right?
Oh God, yes.
Yeah. But I think that look at it this way: multi-authentication, and we can get in a whole conversation about passwords too here. But multi-authentication, whether it includes a biometric or it includes a token or it includes a virtual token, right? Whatever the actual practicality is of the multi-authentication that we're going to be using has got to be the solution going forward. We can't continue to say, look at it this way. I keep reaching for my wallet. The piece of plastic that we use when you were in college and when I was in college, and I'm sure it still happens now, probably not to the degree that it used to. There are folks who would create, fake driver's licenses for you so you could go out and drink, right? Shocking. So we would be naive to think that merely placing it on a different medium, instead of my wallet, we're now putting it in a phone, would limit that problem. Mm-hmm. If that was the only way we were authenticating identity. I think it's not that the driver's license is the challenge, whether physical or digital. I think it's the single authentication. And when I say single, we're looking at a photo that matches to my face, right? And that's all we're doing in terms of authenticating it. And the reason we're saying that that's fine is because you can't, it's hard, I shouldn't say you can't, it's hard to mimic a person's face. Right? But it's not hard to change the photo on a driver's license. At least it used to not be. To be blunt, I haven't tried it in a very long time. So,
there's a lot more security controls now since 9/11 and the Real ID Act, and so there's some very interesting kind of holographic and some other stuff going on up there. But it is there's some serious economics and some cost limitations to how deep they can go with the physical security. It's a mass market thing. After all, it needs to deal with millions of uses, and so as you say, it would be naive to think that the behavior will go away or that this will be immune to the types of fraud and deception that you're talking about.
I think
where do we go with it? What do you think?
I think the end result is it's got to be a multi-authentication process.
Okay.
Got to be, and some other way of it's got to be more than just a one-way authentication process. And whether that, like I said, includes a biometric like a fingerprint or something else, it's got to, you know, the running argument about proving identity is who you are, what you know, and something you possess, right? Those are the three things that most people would say can help prove an identity. Well, if you're just relying on one of those, you're setting yourself up for failure. If you're relying on two, you're obviously doing better, but it's still a challenge. Three is probably the most easy, but when you start talking about, or not easy, but the most
secure, perhaps.
Secure, yeah, secure. But when you start getting to that level, it becomes costly. It becomes, and I don't mean just monetarily. I mean, it becomes costly to the individual. This is where passwords come into play. You know, and it's funny. And I don't mean to derail the conversation into passwords, but I've been thinking about this.
I know you threatened to bring this up earlier, so I guess we're forewarned. So
well, the only reason I'm bringing it up,
let's get ugly. Talk about passwords.
No one. I mean, you do this, and I do this. I write down passwords. I absolutely write them down, and whether I write them down into an application that's stored on my machine that's encrypted, I know. But there are. Let's say I'll estimate I have 50 passwords that I have to remember.
Okay.
Right? And people will say, well, just choose a phrase. Use that. Well, that's great. But if I choose a phrase and I'm required to remember that one phrase, I'm going to use it in multiple. I'm going to use that same phrase in multiple systems.
How else could you remember it, really?
How else could I remember it? So the solution has to be, whether it's password, whether it's driver's license, whether it's some other authentication identity proof system, it's got to be multi-authentication. There's no way around it.
Okay, so let's take that for a moment and go a little deeper. This is timely not only because trying to build scenarios and prototypes around a curriculum of workshops, but also it's very timely because this very weekend be heading to visit our friends in Kansas City, Missouri, Casey Moe, where the Chief Innovation Officer, an American hero of innovation, whose name is Ashley Hand, and Kansas City, Missouri Law School, among others, Code for America, have created these teams, 4 teams around basically hackathon projects that they're doing within a kind of hybrid wrapper of a law school class. Great stuff. Well, one of those projects in collaboration with the city is using OpenID Connect.
Yep.
Great. So it's an OAuth 2 based protocol, very savvy, and looking at an interesting twist that we'd started to uncover, but didn't really make much progress when some of those folks from Kansas City, Missouri, and the law school came out to Boston for something we call the Prototype Jam with City of Boston and some other folks, and we tried to implement more of a pedestrian deployment of OpenID Connect, where the city was the relying party. Basically, they were accepting people logging in with their own OpenID Connect account, sort of like logging with Google or logging with Twitter, for those of you that are familiar. But it could be logging with MIT. It could be logging with Thomson Reuters if you enable your, whatever, you've got LDAP or Active Directory service. MIT actually does enable that. So one of the use cases was login with MIT. Every faculty, student, and staff could log in anywhere that accepts OpenID Connect as on their login screen with, like I would just log with Dazza at, MIT. And so now what they're doing is the next step, and they're looking at the tough policy question, which is what if the city were the IDP, so-called, the identity provider? In other words, the account issuer, you could say. So, Google is the identity provider of Gmail addresses and accounts. What if you used your, I'm going to call it a Civic ID, it's a word we've used, and some vendors are starting to use that word as well, or some kind of citizen or city ID. You can imagine a number of cities might agree to utilize, and if any business or person was had a valid account with one, they could maybe log into any of them, and that's easy enough to hook the endpoints up. What do you imagine might be the problems and the prospects of having of interposing, just as the government at the state level issues the core identifiers and the breeder documents of, like birth certificates and driver's licenses, bar cards, in my case, for an account system, that like a lowest common denominator one that you could then use maybe to amortize, I'm thinking, the economic and the hassle costs of 2 or 3 factors, because it's one thing for me to have like a, and I've been at jobs where I have like, like a ring of different hardware tokens, to get into different, it's how it goes. But then you could imagine if you had maybe it's a highly secure one, and people accepted externally issued credentials from a trusted provider like, MIT or Thomson Reuters or others, or maybe just one, then you could start to now spread that cost and allow for much more reusability of the additional factors of authentication. And I wonder about the policy issues too, because most of the troublesome implications of the scenarios you raised really came down to who's in charge of my identity. Yeah. It's like an identity crisis more than an authentication crisis. It's like, let's say I could authenticate myself fine to a trooper, but my continued use of identity is at the pleasure of, I don't know, some bureaucrat or some like service provider, and hopefully they haven't gone out of business and sold the assets, and maybe I shouldn't be and do I become a product at some point? Do they change my name, to add the product name to it? Like who owns the identity? What are the sovereignty questions? And who are the appropriate identity providers in this new world?
Yeah, those are all, so I like the idea. Like we've toyed with this idea actually. And I've never heard the phrase civic identity, but I like that phrase. But the challenge here, to your point, is the policy challenge, right? And to be blunt, I think some of us would opt in, no problem. We'd say that's a great idea. I don't have to worry about the hassle. I don't have to worry about maintaining. I don't have to worry about anything. I've got a base level document that proves who I am, digital document. And I think some of us would opt into that. I think some of us would go, hold on, who's managing this digital identity, right? That's going to be used to authenticate me. Who's managing it? Is it the government? Okay, well, if it's the government, the argument will be, well, it's no different than your physical driver's license, right? It's just the same. In function, it might be, obviously look different, but in function, it's the same. But I know, and how inefficient governments run, right? We know, and some of that's purposeful, by the way, right? I mean, there's a reason we call it a bureaucracy.
Right.
And people who work in the bureaucracy, bureaucrats, right? There's a reason we call them that. And I'm not sure I'm 100% convinced that we need an innovative government. I don't know that I personally want policy decisions made in a quick, innovative way, like we make products and proofs of concept, because you find we see this all the time with legislation that's passed that ultimately downstream we didn't realize what was going to happen that ultimately happened, and now we're stuck in a double bind sometimes.
You bet. Yeah, the slow, deliberate process that's so much a part of this kind of a republic or democratic experiment we're doing in America, as opposed to, we're familiar with dictatorial systems and monarchical systems that are hierarchical and can have quick decision making. And we didn't choose that. And there are very good reasons why, as you're saying. So I think you're raising some real questions here about who is the appropriate role. And I just would like to leave it for the moment as a question, if I may, unless you definitely want to chuck a opinion out there.
No, that's good.
Okay, good, because I want to come back to you with the work of this really just wonderful team of fresh thinking law students and collaborators in the city and Code for America, and people that are looking at this. They've never really done an identity system before of any sort, or higher grade authentication, or some of the other types of authorization and other networks that you're talking about, and that is underlying what we're saying. And honestly, they're much better for it. So they're just like looking at things very simply in certain ways and very like practically. And I think that they're going to postulate by the end of the weekend, and I'll do what I can to help them. And others are coming as well to create a couple of good prototypes. Something where there'll be something to push against, to really look at scenarios and use cases and begin to struggle with it and think, okay, what's good about it, what's bad about it, what are the alternatives, and maybe begin to have a basis or benchmarking for a meaningful dialogue. And eventually, in the fullness of time, we're gonna, one way or another, we're changing. We're going to be going digital, as you said. Hopefully, we can do our part. In industry, as you're doing now as a thought leader, joining us on this not a client call, Lord knows, it's just a hangout, that we just asked you if you'd please join, gracefully did. And same here in academia and research and other parts of society coming together, trying to get ahead of this a little bit, not leaving it all to government, and not that they even want it, but in any event, it's not for any one constituency to decide these sorts of things. So we're beginning to spur broader engagement and hopefully innovation about adoption of these new technologies, and hopefully a better, less, maybe a smoother kind of adoption ramp in the fullness of time. And so that's why I'd like to ask if you'd be willing to, I'll probably replay some of your words and some of where we're at, and then just set up the question, and then let the students show what they show, and the others, and then see if we can invite some of the real gurus in identity. And I think the United States is blessed to have some of just the finest thinkers from the OpenID consortium and Kantara and the IETF, and a lot of amazing folks that have done just terrific things in vendor space and research and just out there as entrepreneurs, and have a meaningful dialogue. That's my long-winded way of saying, oh, Jason, would you please join us again for the part 2 of your Into the Future with Jason Thomas, and we'll literally maybe do Into the Future with you.
Yeah, count me in. I'm happy. In fact, I would love to see what the ideas are that these students come out with. I think that would be incredibly interesting.
Great. Well, so with no obligation, I'll ask the professors if we can include you and your colleague for at least an invitation. I think we're due around on Saturday or Sunday, where we may have people from Legal Hackers in Chicago giving feedback or something. So if there's something like that, I'll certainly invite you. But what I had in mind was something more like toward the end of the semester, around June 6th.
Oh, sure.
We're actually doing a big thing with MIT and Thomson Reuters.
Oh, cool.
It'll be the culmination of this legal hackathon series that we've been working together on, starting with the Anchor and the ABA Tech Show, and then moving forward to the National Day of Civic Hacking. For real, that's what it's called.
That's great.
Is that great?
That's a wonderful title.
Can't make this stuff up. It's really refreshing. Let us see what we can do to maybe harden, our soft underbelly here in civil society, so we're less prone to being hacked in the negative sense, and maybe can start to avail ourselves more in larger swaths and more reliably of the amazing efficiencies and new opportunities and revenue and cost and reduction, and maybe whole new types of solutions that they could be available if we could utilize our identities as services in a way that was effective and safe and convenient and easy. So we want to make a good run at it, and we very much appreciate your vantage point. And then also, you're not off the hook. I've got a placeholder of a question about how do we really deal with in a constructive and in an appropriate way, the set of requirements that's seldom directly at the table, but it's the intelligence community requirements. They're sort of they're a bit subterranean. They come up in weird headlines and movies, but it's typically would be considered a bad day if they come up directly in someone's business. But yet it's got to be part of the big design scheme somehow. So we'd like to draw a little bit of conversation, not speaking on behalf of the government, of course, but a little bit of conversation where people can start to grapple with whether it's escrows or backdoors or processes or warrants or who knows what. But I know that it's a topic that you have a unique, at least among we Civic hackers, like you've got some real expertise in, and we'd be very grateful for some of your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah. Now or later? You tell me.
Later, if you don't mind, only because I see we're at 2:49, and that I kind of promised I'm trying to wind these things up with 15 minutes to go, so you can, answer a couple of calls and, not go right up to the end of the hour. Yeah. But I'd like to, so thank you for agreeing to something in the future. We'll send calendar requests along if you're available on June 6th. I know we'll have a big thing then, but there's no magic to that day. We'd like to, it's a great thing about Hangouts and the internet. It's like we can be flexible time-wise, and perhaps if you like, why don't you take our remaining moments if you'd like to wrap or maybe leave folks with any thought or any idea. I encourage you to do that.
Yeah, I would just say that this is cool, right? Doing the hangout and having a conversation. And I think the at the end of the day, right? I think at the end of the day, we live in a world that enables we spend a lot of time talking about technology here in the United States, but when you think about technology globally, what you realize very quickly is that in parts of the world, technology enables societies to leapfrog where they're at and jump ahead of much of the developed world. And I'm so enthusiastic and encouraged by groups of people who come together that end up building cool tech that can be used to pull somebody out of poverty, right? So if you think about digital currencies, for example,
right?
Digital currencies are I mean, there's a lot of negative associated with them, but there's some very cool stuff that kind of technology can do to pull somebody out of poverty in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, think about this: the entire, almost like 98% of the country of Kenya uses mobile phones to move money. They don't have bank accounts because they're unbanked. And most of the phones are dumb phones. They're not smartphones.
Yeah, it's the text network paired with the providers at the merchants, right?
Yep. Man, that is cool, adaptive work that's not really high tech, that is enabling people to develop economies, right? And that's what to me is so encouraging about events like this and the work that you guys are doing from a civic perspective. I would encourage you, moving forward, to think about things globally, not necessarily just inside the United States, because globally, I think, there's a difference between an 80% solution and a 100% solution. And I think an 80% solution, whatever it is, gets the global community much farther ahead than it would inside the United States. And inside the United States, we think in 100%. We think 100% solutions is the norm, right? You got to adjust for every possible contingency when you build a tech. In some overseas locations, if I can just get the damn lights on, that's all I need, right? And so I would encourage, my last thing I would say is I would encourage you to think about things more globally, not just inside the United States.
Terrific. That's very well timed yet again, because we've been getting very, at least I have in my research the last few years, been getting very myopically focused on code for America, and a declared narrower use case, partly because we've had this, I think, just flush of opportunity, and there's been it's been great times for people that are wanting to innovate domestically. In fact, I know from experience what you say is so true. I mean, the projects in the Media Lab, some of them that have made the biggest impact in the United States, were really designed for barrios in South America and in very inhospitable environments where literacy cannot be assumed and connection cannot be assumed, and actually ain't that just America too? I mean, like, it's a big country, and like you said, every one of us from time to time for natural disaster or the personal disaster, batteries not working, and everything in between, would need resilient systems. We need systems that work, and ultimately we are one people. We are a population. That's the network at work here when we connect people. And so I accept your challenge or your invitation to think more broadly, and I think it will redound to the benefit of folks locally, but that's the mission of MIT for sure, as well. And you're on, and I'll bring that message back as well. So I thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. So until next time, Dazza Greenwood signing off for MIT Media Lab's, in this case, Into the Future series with Jason Thomas of Thomson Reuters. And check back at law.MIT.edu for future programming. Until then, wishing you all the best, and see you online.